We are now at stage 10, paragraph page 887.
Yeah.
Okay, and our last head word was refusal, new word type of lesson. Okay, so let's start with revision. Ready?
Okay.
Here we go. Do you think that people who shoplift should be imprisoned? Do you think people who shoplift should be imprisoned? Yes or no?
No,
I don't think
I don't
that
think
people
that
who
people
shoplift
who
should
shoplift
be imprisoned.
should be in prison.
Very good. Is there a cure for the common cold? Is there a cure for the common cold? No, there
No,
isn't a
there
cure
isn't a
for the
cure
common cold.
for the common cold.
Do you usually take a cold remedy to make you feel better when you have a cold? Do you usually take a cold remedy to make you feel better when you have a cold? Yes or no?
Yes,
I usually
I
take a
usually
cold
take
remedy
a cold
to make
remedy
me feel
to
better
make me feel
when
better
I have a
when
cold.
I have a cold.
Very good. What types of aircraft take off vertically? What types of aircraft take off vertically? Helicopters and
Helicopters
certain
and
special
certain
airplanes
special
take
airplanes
off vertically.
take off vertically.
Very good. Why do some people prefer to stain woodwork rather than paint it? Why do some people prefer to stain woodwork rather than paint it? Some people
Some people
prefer to stain
prefer
woodwork
to stain
woodwork
woodwork
rather than paint it. Rather than paint it.
rather than paint
Paint
it
because the woodwork
because the
looks
woodwork
more natural
looks more
if
naturally.
it is stained.
It if it if it is stained.
Perfect. Very good. If you discovered an ink stain on an article of clothing, how would you try to remove it? If you discovered an ink stain on an article of clothing, how would you try to remove it? If I
If
discovered
I
an ink
discovered
stain
an ink
on
stain
an article
on
of
an
clothing,
article of
I
clothing,
try to remove it.
I'd try to
Why?
remove it by using a wet towel.
Very good. What does the word creep mean? What does the word creep mean? The word creep
The
means
word creep
either
means
to move
either
forwards,
to move
forwards
forwards
very slowly,
very
or
slowly
to move slowly
or to move
and
slowly
quietly
and
so that
quietly
nobody
so that
hears you.
nobody hears you.
Very good. Give me an example of each. Give me an example of each, please. The traffic
The
was
traffic
creeping along
was creeping
very
along
slowly,
very slowly,
owing to the fact,
owing
owing
to
to
the
the
fact
fact that several
that
roads
several
had
roads
been blocked
had been
by
blocked
the
by the
police.
police.
Elizabeth crept
Elizabeth
into the
crept
room
into the room
so as not
so
to wake
as
the
not
baby.
to wake the baby.
Very good. What does the word passage mean? What does the word passage mean? The word
The
passage
word
can
passage
mean a
it
long, narrow
means
space,
a long
narrow
narrow
space,
space,
generally between
generally
two
between
buildings
two
or
buildings
inside a
or
building,
inside the
like a
buildings,
corridor.
like a
It
corridor.
can also mean
It can also
a
mean
short extract
a short
from a
extract
speech
from a
or a
speech
piece of
or
writing.
piece of writing.
Very good. What am I pretending to do? What am I pretending to do? You're pretending
You are
to
pretending
steer a
to
car.
steer a car.
And what do we call the thing I'm pretending to hold? And what do we call the thing I'm pretending to hold? We call the thing
We call the
you're
thing
pretending
you
to
are
hold
pretending to
a
hold
steering wheel.
a steering wheel.
Very good. What does the word aside mean? What does the word aside mean? The word
The word
aside means
aside
on
means
one side
on one
or
side
to one
or
side.
to one side.
Do you put money aside each month to save for any special purpose? Do you put money aside each month to save for any special purpose? Yes or no?
No,
I don't put
I don't
money
put
aside
money
each month
aside
to
each
save each
each
month
month
to
to save
save for any special
or
purpose.
any special purpose.
Very good. During an evening out with friends, would you have to take somebody aside from the rest of the group if you wanted to speak to them in private? During an evening out with friends, would you have to take somebody aside from the rest of the group if you wanted to speak to them in private? Yes. During
Yes,
an evening
during
out
an
with
evening out
friends,
with
I'd
friends,
have to take
I'd have to
somebody
take
aside
somebody
from the
aside
rest of the group
from the rest of the
if I
group
wanted to
if I
speak to
wanted
them,
to to
speak
speak
to them
them
in private.
in private.
Very good. Do naughty children at primary school always obey instructions that their teacher give them? Do naughty children at primary school always obey instructions that their teacher give them? No. Naughty
No,
children
not
at
children,
primary
naughty
school
children at primary school
don't always
don't
obey
always
instructions
obey
that their
instructions
teachers
that
give
their
them.
teachers give them.
They sometimes
They
disobey
sometimes
them.
disobey them.
Weged, what do we have to? What do we do? Oh, what do we have to stick on an envelope before we can post it? What do we have to stick on an envelope before we can post it? We have to stick
We
a
have to
stamp
stick a stamp
on an envelope
on an envelope
before we can post it.
before we can eh,
We
we
can post it.
we can post it.
Very good. One more. We have to stick
We
a
have to
stamp
stick a
on an
stamp
envelope
on an envelope
before we can
before
post it.
we can post it.
What do tailors use to fasten pieces of cloth together while they're sewing? What do tailors use to fasten pieces of cloth together while they're sewing? Tailors use pins
Tailors
to
use
fasten
pins to
pieces of
fasten
cloth
pieces of
together
clothes
while they're
together
sewing.
while they are sewing.
How do we stick notices on a notice board? How do we stick notices on a notice board? We stick
We
notices
stick
on a notice board
notices on a notice
by
board
using
by
a
using
drawing pin.
a drawing pin.
What are the three forms of stick? What are the three forms of stick? The three
The
forms
three
of stick
forms of
are stick,
stick are
stuck,
stick,
stuck.
stack, stack.
What do we mean when we say that somebody sticks to a plan? What do we mean when we say somebody sticks to a plan? When we say
When
that
we say
somebody
that somebody
sticks to a plan,
sticks to a
we
plan,
mean that
we
they
mean that
refuse to
they
change
refuse to
their
change
plan
their
even
plan,
when the
even when
situation
the
is difficult
situation is
or there
difficult
is
or
opposition
there is opposition
to their ideas.
to their ideas.
Are the police allowed to follow a criminal across the borders of their own country into another country? Are the police allowed to follow a criminal across the borders of their own country into another country? No. The
No,
police aren't
the
allowed
police aren't
to
allowed
follow a
to
criminal
follow a
across the
criminal
borders
across
of
the
their own
borders
country
of their own
into another
country
country.
into another country.
Which countries does your country share a border with? Which countries does your country share a border with? My country
My country
doesn't share a
doesn't
border
share a border
with any
with
country.
any country.
What do we generally find along the borders of a field? What do we generally find along the borders of a field? We generally find
We
a
generally find
hedge
a
or a
hedge
fence
or a fence
along the
along
borders
the
of a
borders
field.
of a field.
Reggie, do you prefer plain clothes or clothes with patterns on them? Do you prefer plain clothes or clothes with patterns on them? I prefer
I prefer plain clothes
than clothes
than
with
clothes
patterns on them.
with patterns on them.
Reggie, who do you think should be more responsible for setting the correct pattern of behavior for children, parents or teachers? Who do you think should be more responsible for setting the correct patterns of behavior for children, parents or teachers? I think
I think parents
should be more responsible
should be more
than
responsible
teachers
than
for
teachers
setting the correct
for setting the
patterns
correct
of
patterns
behavior for
of
children.
behavior for children.
Do some people get into financial difficulties through spending too much on their credit cards? Do some people get into financial difficulties through spending too much on their credit cards? Yes, some people
Yes, some
get
people
into
get
financial
into
difficulties
financial
through
difficulty
spending too
through
much
spending too
on their
much
credit
on
cards.
their credit card.
Very good. Okay, what am I doing? What am I doing? You're weaving
You're
the
weaving
first finger
the first
of
finger
your right hand
of your right hand
over and under
over and
the
under
fingers of
the
your left
fingers
hand.
of your left hand.
Very good. What are the three forms of weave? What are the three forms of weave? The three forms
The
of
three
weave
forms of
are
weave
weave,
are weave,
woven.
wove, woven.
What kind of things can we make by weaving? What kind of things can we make by weaving? We can make
We
cloth,
can make clothes,
baskets,
basket,
etc. by
etc.
weaving.
by weaving.
Very good. Are there any parts of your country that have been ruined by tourism? Are there any parts of your country that had been ruined by tourism? Yes or no?
Yes,
There are some
there
parts
are
of
some
my
parts
country
of my
that
country
have been ruined
that have been
by
ruined
tourism.
by tourism.
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 Very good. Are there any old ruins in your hometown? Are there any old ruins in your hometown? Yes or no?
Yes,
There are
there
some
are
old
some
ruins
old
in
ruins
my
in
hometown.
my hometown.
What are they? What are they? They're the
There
ruins
are
of.
ruins of a castle.
Very good. Okay. What am I doing? What am I doing? You're
You
whispering.
are whispering.
Why do people whisper? Why do people whisper? People whisper
People
because
whisper
they don't want
because they don't
others to
want
hear
others
what
to
they're
hear
saying.
what they are saying.
Very good. How do you prefer to see a living room lit with overhead lights or with lamps? How do you prefer to see a living room lit with overhead lights or with lamps? I prefer to
I
see
prefer
a living
to
room
see
lit
a living room lit
with
with overhead
headlights
light
than with lamps.
than with lamps.
Where do most people in your area keep their cars in garages or leave them in the street? Do most people in your area keep their cars in garages or leave them in the street? Most people in
Most
my
people
area
in my
keep
area
their cars
keep keeps their
keep their
cars
cars in garages.
in garages.
Very good. If you suddenly do a lot of physical exercise after a long period of not having done any exercise at all, do your muscle feel stiff the next day? If you suddenly do a lot of physical exercise after a long period of not having done any exercise at all, do your muscle feel stiff the next day? Yes. If I
Yes, if
suddenly
I
do a
suddenly
lot of
do a
physical
lot of
exercise
physical
after a
exercise
long period
after a
of
long
not
period
having done
of not having
any
done
exercise at
any
all,
exercise at
my
all,
muscle feels stiff
my muscle feels stiff
the next day.
the next day.
Very good. What is a cereal box usually made of? What is a cereal box usually made of? A cereal box
A cereal
is
box
usually
is
made
usually
of
made
cardboard.
of cardboard.
Very good. Would you be astonished if one of your family members walk into the room right now? Would you be astonished if one of your family members walk into the room right now? Yes or no?
Yes,
I'd be
I,
astonished.
I be I be astonished.
Bummer? Yes, I'd be
Yes, I'd
astonished
be
if
astonished
one of my
if
family
one of
members
my family
walk
members
into the room
walk
right
into the
now.
room right now.
Like, what's the noun of the verb to refuse? What's the noun of the verb to refuse? The noun of the
The
verb
noun
to
of the
refuse
verb to
is
refuse
refusal.
is refusal.
Give me an example. Give me an example, please. Her refusal
Her
to listen
refusal
to other
to listen
people's
to other
opinions
people's
means
opinions
that she
means
will never
that
be
he will
a
never
good
be
manager.
a good manager.
Very good. Okay, so that's the end of our revision. Very good, very fast. Let's have new work. Okay, repeat. Bound,
Bound,
out of bounds,
out of bound,
boundary.
boundary.
Very good. Okay, listen. Bound is a verb. It means to set a limit of something or to form a border around an area. For example, the prison yard is bounded on all sides by a high wall. My house and his house are bounded by a line. The town is bounded by mountains. If an area is says out of bounds, it means nobody is allowed to enter the area. For example, a sign on the door says out of bounds. It means nobody is allowed to enter the area beyond the door. Boundary is a noun that means border. For example, the boundary between my house and his house is the wall. One generally puts a hedge or a fence as a boundary of one's property in a field. Let's practice. Is England bounded on all sides by the sea? Is England bounded on all sides by the sea? No. England
No,
isn't bounded
England isn't
on
bounded
all sides by
on
the
all
sea.
sides by the
It
sea.
shares borders
It shares
with
borders
Scotland and
with
Wales.
Scotland and
And
Wales.
Wales. Very good. What does a sign on a door saying out of bounds mean? What does a sign on a door saying out of bounds mean? A sign on a
A
door
sign on a
saying
door
out of bounds
saying out
means
of bounds
that
means
nobody is
that
allowed
nobody
to
is
enter the
allowed
area
to enter the
beyond the
area
door.
beyond the door.
Where how does one generally mark the boundary of one's property? How does one generally mark the boundary of one's property? One generally marks
One generally
the
marks
boundary
the
of
boundary
one's property
of
with a
one's
wall,
property with
with
a
a
wall,
fence,
fence
hedge,
with a fence,
etc.
hedge, etc.
Very good. Next, repeat. B.
B.
Wasp.
Wasp.
Sting, stung, stung.
Sting, stung, stung.
Sensation.
Sensation.
Slap.
Slap.
Very good. Listen. B. The word bee is a noun. It is an insect with black and yellow colors. It flies and loves honey or makes honey. A wasp is an insect with black and yellow colors too. It also flies like a bee. Sting is a verb which means to hurt someone by piercing the skin with a sharp pointed part that usually contains poison or venom. The three forms of sting are sting, stung, stung. For example, when a bee stings, it really hurts. Sensation is a noun, which means a feeling or the effect that a body experiences. For example, if you were stung by a bee, you would get a stinging sensation. Slap is a verb. It is to hit using the back or front of your hand, like that. For example, when I broke up with my girlfriend because of another girl, she slapped me. Oh, very good. Let's practice. What's a wasp likely to do if it lands on you while you're sunbathing and you disturb it? What's a wasp likely to do if it lands on you while you're sunbathing and you disturb it? If a wasp
If I
lands
were
on you
lands on
while
you
you're sunbathing,
while
while you're
while
sunbathing,
you are
sunbathing,
bathing,
and you
sunbathing,
disturb it,
and you
disturb it,
disturb it,
it's likely to
it's
sting you.
likely to sting you.
Very good. One more. If a wasp
If a wasp
lands on you
lands on
while
you
you're
while
sunbathing
you are
and you
sunbathing
disturb it,
and you disturb
it's
it,
likely to
it's
sting you.
likely to sting you.
Very good. Which do you think it's more painful to be stung by, a bee or a wasp? Which do you think it's more painful to be stung by, a bee or a wasp? I think it's
I
more
think
painful
it's more
to be
painful
stung by a
to be stung by a wasp
than a bee.
than a bee.
From what else do we get a stinging sensation? From what else do we get a stinging sensation? We get a
We
stinging
get a
sensation
stinging
when
sensation
we are slapped
when we
by
are slapped
someone,
by someone,
when we clean a
when
wound,
we clean a wound,
etc.
etc.
We're going to repeat curl.
How?
We're going to listen. Curl can be used as a noun or a verb. As a noun, a curl is something that has the shape of a ring. For example, a piece of hair that forms the shape of a ring is a curl. If a verb, as a verb, it means to form a round shape or a twist into a curved shape. For example, cats curl up when they sleep to prevent the heat from their bodies escaping. Let's practice. What do we call a piece of hair that forms the shape of a ring? What do we call a piece of hair that forms the shape of a ring? We call a
We
piece of
call
hair
a piece of
that
hair
forms the shape,
that warms,
forms the shape
forms the shape
of a ring,
of a
a
ring,
curl.
a curl.
Where the smoke curl upwards when there's a strong wind. The smoke curl upwards when there's a strong wind? No.
No,
Smoke doesn't curl
smoke doesn't
upwards
curl
upward
upwards
when there's a
when
strong wind.
there's a strong
It
wind.
gets blown away.
It gets blown away.
Very good. Why do cats and dogs often curl up when they sleep? Why do cats and dogs often curl up when they sleep? Cats and dogs
Cats and
often
dogs
curl up
often curl
when they
up
sleep
when they
because
sleep
it prevents the
because
heat
it prevents the
from their
heat
bodies
from their
from
bodies
escaping.
from escaping.
Very good. Next, repeat. Paste.
Paste,
Toothpaste.
toothpaste.
Very good. Okay. Listen. Paste and toothpaste are both nouns. A paste is a mixture made from a powder and a liquid. We use toothpaste to brush our teeth. Let's practice. What's a paste? What's a paste? A paste
A
is a
paste
mixture
is a mixture
made from a powder
made from a powder
and a liquid.
and a liquid.
Very good. When you go to stay at someone else's house, do you take your own toothpaste with you or do you ask to use their toothpaste? When you go to stay at someone else's house, do you take your own toothpaste with you or do you ask to use their toothpaste? When I go to
When I
stay
go
at
to
someone
stay
else's
at
house,
someone else's house,
I
I
take my own
take my own
toothpaste with me.
toothpaste with me.
Very good. Next, repeat. Creative.
Creative,
Novel.
noble,
Very good. Okay, listen. Creative is an adjective. It means producing or using original and unusual ideas. For example, writers must have a creative imagination to write books. Novel is a noun. It is a long printed story about imaginary characters and events. For example, Haruki Murakami is a popular writer of novels in Japan. An example of his novel is The Norwegian Wood. Let's practice. Does one have to have a creative imagination to write a novel? Does one have to have a creative imagination to write a novel? Yes.
Yes,
One has to have
one has to
a
have
creative
a
imagination
creative
to
imagination
write a novel.
to write a novel.
Very good. Okay, last one. Repeat story,
Story,
variety,
variety,
thin food,
in,
thin food,
think, proof,
food.
food,
Very good. Okay, listen. A store can be a noun and a verb. A store, as a noun, is a shop which sells a variety of different goods. It can either be a very large shop in the city, which sells food, clothes, furniture, and almost anything you can think of. Or it can be a shop in a village that sells many different products that the people in the village might need. Variety means a lot of things of the same kind that are different from each other in some way. Tin food means canned goods or canned foods from which are put in cans. Let's practice. What's a store? What's a store? A store is a
a
shop
store
which
is a shop
sells a
which sells
variety of
a
different
variety
goods.
of different
It
goods.
can either be
It can
a
either
very
be
large shop
a
in the
very large
city
shop in
which
this
sells
city
food,
which
clothes,
sells food, clothes,
furniture, and almost
furniture,
anything
and
you
almost
can think
anything
of.
you can
Or
think of.
it can be a shop
Or it can be
in
a
a
shop
village
in
that
a
sells
village
many
that
different
sells
products
many different
that the people
products
in the
that the
village
people in the
might
village
need. Might need.
might be.
Very good. Okay, next. Store as a verb means to collect and keep for future use. And the noun store means a collection of something for future use. Okay, so let's practice. Should wine be stored in a warm or cool environment? Should wine be stored in a warm or cool environment? Wine should be
Wine
stored
should be
in a
stored
cool
in
environment.
a cool environment.
Very good. Okay, now let's move on to your reading.
Yeah.
Okay, reading is at stage 10, paragraph page 861. Last headword was flash. Okay, please start reading at page 162. Saucer tablecloth.
Saucer. Saucer tablecloth. What do we use a saucer for? We use a saucer to stand a cup on in order to prevent any of the liquid that might collect around the bottom of the cup getting onto the table or tablecloth and leaving a mark. File. Known. Do the police store files on known criminals to help them fight crime? Yes, the police store files on known criminals to help them fight crime. Do you manage to keep all the files on your computer carefully organized? Yes, I manage to keep all the files on my computer carefully organized. Fade, sunlight. What makes the color in clothes fade? Sunlight and washing can make the color in clothes fade. Do up, undo, and down. Dip, knot. Which are quicker to do an up and undo, zips or buttons? Zips are quicker to do up and undo than buttons. What happens to a knot if
To
we
one more.
don't
What
tie
happens to a knot?
what happens to a knot if we don't tie it tightly enough? If we don't tie a knot
Tightly enough.
tightly enough, it will eventually come undone.
Mhm.
Which verb do we use to describe the feeling that somebody wishes they could undo an action they've done? We use the verb regret to describe the feeling that somebody wishes they could undo an action that they've done. Regain consciousness. When someone faints, how long does it usually take for them to regain consciousness? When someone faints, it usually takes about 3 minutes for them to regain consciousness.
Mhm.
Confused. Why
Consume.
d- consume? Why do some people buy big cars despite the fact that they consume enormous amounts of petrol? Some people buy big cars despite the fact that they consume enormous amounts of petrol because they need big cars. Applause, clap. What am I doing? You are clapping your hands together in applause for something. What does an audience do
Okay,
when abroad?
very good.
Oh,
So we
ticket.
stop there for today, but very
Yeah.
good reading, very good dictation,